We're good. All right. Well, welcome back to SoulBack. This is the R&B podcast. Kyle here, back with Tom and Ed. Happy Halloween, as you can see from our costumes. Ed is dressed up as a superhero. He's ready to save R&B.
Always.
But I think the best way to save R&B is to talk about music that came out 20 years ago when R&B was a little better.
What is Ed?
Yeah. What are you?
Oh, see, I'm dealing with people who don't know they're superheroes or watch TV. I am Black Lightning. If you know, you know. Tom,
You're
it's
what?
too early. You dipping in the Henny already?
Cheers, guys.
It's going to be one of those podcasts, y'all.
It definitely will be. But
All right,
guys,
I'm taking this bucket off, guys. I can't focus. I can't focus on R&B with the bucket on.
All right. Well, 2000 R&B, that's what we're talking about here today. Wow, that was 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, guys, was the year 2000. Can we, before we even talk about the Halloween stuff, can you guys tell me, did you guys believe in the Y2K bug when that thing was a thing?
Well, I won't say I believed in it, but I was very cautious. I remember I didn't go out the evening. I guess it was 99. I was at home with my parents. And everybody was just waiting to see it. We didn't think something was going to happen, but we were waiting to make sure because you didn't want to get caught slipping if the world shut down. So it took 20 years before the Y2K bug killed us all, but we were fine in 2000.
Let me just shout out Jermaine Dupri, who was on here. We cannot wait to talk about that J.E. Heartbreak album, so stay tuned.
We got some stuff for you, JD.
We're ready, but I remember Y2K. I was nervous. I mean, we didn't know. This was before, internet was totally widespread. You didn't know what to expect. So
yeah,
thankfully we're still here. We survived, right?
Can you imagine the rumors and garbage y'all would be spreading if it was like 2019? It would be so many memes and ridiculousness.
Yeah, I actually I'm curious to see what the music industry felt like when the Y2K bug hit. Because I remember reading somewhere where labels were really panicking because all their databases would be wiped out and all their songs would be gone. JD, maybe you can answer that for us as we go along. But let's talk about 2000s R&B here, guys.
Yes.
20 years ago, I posted the collages so we know the albums. And I mean, let's get this one out of the way here, because a lot of people got mad at me that I didn't post it in the collage. And Ed, you know where we're going with this one.
Already.
We have
Come
to.
on with it, player.
Personally, I think it's his best album. I'm talking about Mr. R. Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
This is the album with I Wish on it.
Time for me to tune out.
You might want to mute for a minute, Tom.
I believe Fiesta's on this album too. And this album is actually pretty solid. But Ed, talk about this album. TP2.
You see, I had to take a swig because the last time we talked about the Pied Piper, I lost my voice for 10 minutes because God was like, no R. Kelly on the podcast. I will just say this as a disclaimer as before. This is a historical look at the year 2000, and to look back at it and exclude the contributions of that gentleman would be a grand disservice because we're looking at this historically. We aren't condoning anything he said, may have said, done, may have done. But I agree with Kyle. I think that it's my favorite R. Kelly album. I don't think it's his best. I think it's very close. We talked about in 2003, I think Chocolate Factory is number one. But when it comes to the album that really helped transition his sound into the new millennium, this is it, and one of my favorites of the year, objectively speaking.
Tom, don't you not like the song I Wish?
I don't like it, guys. I mean, I want to hear what people in the comments think, but I never liked it. I mean,
I don't either.
Yeah, lyrically.
And I don't like Fiesta either.
Fiesta,
man.
I mean, Fiesta, they pushed that on us. They really forced us down our throats as a single. I never thought it was that good of a song. I mean,
me neither.
It was an interesting time because remember, this was before you had SoundCloud artists coming out and breaking out on their own as stars, and this was when labels still dominated and can control things. So if a label wanted to make a song a single and make it stick, they had the money to do it. So I'm not saying that's what happened, but I feel like R. Kelly was the biggest name at the time. They can make that happen.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And then after that, Tom, it was Snake and Thoya Thong, and they
Oh,
kept on
man.
doing
God. Oh,
Oh.
you were scraping the barrel tonight.
Well, we got that over with. We're, we're done talking about Kells. Let's talk about some other R&B albums that came out in 2000 here. I want to start off by talking about the Jagged Edge album, J.E. Heartbreak. Jermaine Dupri is in here, tuned in. Appreciate you for joining us, JD. But J.E. Heartbreak, the album. Guys, this was a couple years removed from their debut. It kind of took them some time to follow up to the sophomore album, and what a sophomore album. Hit after hit. Let's Get Married, He Can't Love You, Promise, Keys to the Range. I know you love that song. Tom, I'll start with you. Talk about that album. I know it's one of your favorites.
I was really looking forward to that one in 2000 when it came out because I loved their debut. And man, that has become one of my favorite albums front to back. I'm looking at the comments. You know, some people are mentioning some songs they like as well. But front to back, shout out to Beat Cox, some of his earlier work. Shout out to Jermaine Dupri, who was in here. Shout out to Jagged Edge, because they followed up their debut album with an album I consider even better than their debut, and really solidified themselves as one of the top groups in R&B. So, love that album. But Ed, I want to hear your thoughts.
Tom, when you're right, you're right. I mean, I was a big fan of the debut. I thought it was, and to be fair, just to be honest, because we keep it 100 on the podcast, I wasn't even that excited for the sophomore album. I liked the singles. I was a big fan of the group, but I was just blown away at the consistency, and they just had really found their groove by the second album. It had, the first one I loved, the second one took it to a new level, and I talk about this all the time in my album reviews. I just talked about it in my Busta Rhymes review. Y'all go check that out on Soul and Stereo. Great album. But what makes a great album, and not some of these albums y'all get hype about on Twitter for 2 seconds, that has 3 songs that you like. When you have great singles mixed with incredible album cuts, I'm looking at Instagram and I'm looking at all these album cuts that people are naming that were never on the radio, but you remember them because they were so solid. That's what makes a cohesive, strong album. When you can go from single album cut, without skipping, without losing a beat. That's a great body of work. To me, by far, their best project.
And we got to talk about the intro, the J.E. Heartbreak intro. That's one of the greatest intros with the piano.
Wow.
No argument.
Track,
amazing intro. But I'm going to ask you guys this. I want the people to participate as well. And if you're listening to this, you know, on Spotify or Apple Music, you're missing out. Come join us on YouTube and Instagram Live every week. But what's the better version of Let's Get Married, the original or the remix?
I gotta go original for now, just because the remix just got so played out. But the remix is so fun, and I love a remix that there are like 2 types of remixes, especially in the 90s. It's like one that's the same song with a rapper thrown on the back, or one that completely reinvents it, that it's a whole new song. And that's what this is. It goes from a slow jam to an absolute party starter that has become a wedding staple for 20 years. Can't really hate that. They have an absolute classic record. Again, that's what a classic is, y'all. Something that stands the test of time. I would say objectively that the remix has a better legacy, but for me, in my house, I'm probably going to rock the original more likely than not.
Let me just shout out Jermaine Dupri once again, because, you know, back in the day, P. Diddy claimed he was the remix king, but man, Jermaine Dupri really brought some amazing remixes, gave them whole new energy. It wasn't like Ed said, where he just threw a rapper on the song and made it the same song. He created a whole new song out of it, and he was masterful at that, you know, and we got to give him respect for that.
It's not R&B, but you know what one of my favorite remixes of all time is? The Big Papa remix, JD remix.
Wow.
He just completely flipped the beat. One of my favorites of all time. But yeah, that's what we take. Take an incredible song, make it completely different, but even still hot.
And we can't forget about those Mariah remixes either. But this is a 2000s episode. This is not an episode about JD. We might do that another day. So I'm going to go through a couple more albums here. I'm scared to ask about this question because Tom and Ed fight every time we talk about this album.
Oh, no.
Oh, whoa, what's this?
Voodoo, D'Angelo.
Oh, boy. We're starting early.
Well, I'm curious.
Go ahead, Kyle. Go ahead before I get into it.
I'm actually really curious amongst the people that are tuning in, who loved this album from the get-go? Because there's people like there's a lot of people. We spoke to Bobby V, and it took him a couple of listens to really get it. Some would say that Tom and myself still don't get it. Ed, I know you're only okay with this album, but this album, if you go on Twitter, everyone loves this album. So where do we stand with Voodoo?
I have said a million times, it is one of the most important albums, but it's not truly an R&B album in the terms of the albums we'll be discussing today. It's a funk album. It's like a completely different sound that's an offshoot of the R&B that we know. If you ain't down with that dirty, stinky, sweaty funk, you're not going to get with it. And to me, I can appreciate it as a reviewer, but as just a fan, it's not my type of music. But I never say it's a bad. Y'all think it's like a bad album. I would never say that. It's just not for me.
I saw the comment from our guy, I think Shaquille Perry, I'm trying to go through the comments, mentioned Ed has Untitled, How Does It Feel as the R&B song of the decade. Now, it's interesting to revisit that song because remember that I feel like that made the project what it was, because a lot of people weren't paying attention until D'Angelo came out with a six-pack and chiseled body, half-naked video, and that kind of made people pay attention because, that's just the way it was. We have to keep it real, but for me, I've tried so hard to understand this album over the years. I've revisited like every year. It's just not it's just not for me. I like some songs like Send It On. I actually like Devil's Pie a lot, with the rap features on there.
Yeah.
Left and Right, I never really got, the single with Method Man and Redman. There's a few others, but man, I love Brown Sugar. It's probably one of my holy grail favorite albums, but this one did not really do it for me. And this is like a Twitter thriller. I know we have that feature on here. Yep. People say this is like a classic. I can't see it, guys. Ed, what are you drinking?
Unlike you, I'm drinking water. I don't have anything. I don't have anything spiked in it tonight.
All right, so Kyle, that's how I feel.
Yeah, Tom, I'm actually surprised you didn't dress up like D'Angelo in the Untitled video for this podcast.
Oh my God!
Now,
listen, guys.
This is a visual podcast. I don't need all that.
Listen, guys, I have a son now. I'm not in the gym as much as I'd like to be anymore, so I can't quite pull that off.
Unfortunately. I want to talk about two other albums here, and these two I think are, I think they're universally acknowledged as great albums, but I don't think people talk about how great these albums are enough, especially today. Dave Hollister's Chicago 85, and Joe, My Name Is Joe. Ed, I'll start with you. Dave Hollister, what do you love about this album?
Player, listen, if they won't talk about how great this is, Black Lightning's going to talk about how great this is right here tonight, because that album is incredible. I've talked before about how Dave Hollister is one of the most unsung voices and artists of this era. And this album, to me, Chicago 85, should have put him at the top. It's one of those albums that if it dropped today, Twitter would lose its absolute mind. But competition was a lot heavier then. Didn't really get the mainstream push it deserved, despite some great songs. I kind of compare it to J.E. Heartbreak, in that it's an album that had great singles that people remember, kind of defining singles for his career, but front to back. Just incredible performances, incredible vocals, incredible album cuts. One of those albums you can let go, throw it on, don't skip a beat. Just so solid from front to back. It's his best work.
And Tom, My Name Is Joe. I Want to Know, huge song. You have Stutter, and then you have the remix with Mystical. This album, probably Joe's best, if not his second best. But Tom, how big was this album for Joe?
This was huge. Joe, people don't realize his first two albums before this one were actually really good as well, especially his second album. But he had NSYNC on this album. How crazy is that for an R&B singer to have NSYNC on their album? He had that song with Mariah and Nas, the remix, Thank God I Found You, on this album. That's just like some of the later songs. But realistically, there were so many songs that could have been singles on this album, from front to back. And definitely is probably his most consistent work from top to bottom. Maybe his best album. I still really like his second album, but this kind of made Joe a household name at this point and sent him to becoming one of the top artists in R&B, and he's never looked back, still at that point. And much love to Joe.
Can we talk about the Stutter remix? That hit #1 on the Billboard 100. You know, the original was great, but the remix really took it to another level. Of course, I had the sample, but that remix was huge.
Yeah, and I think, again, what we were discussing, I don't think people really give Joe his props as far as being Joe today. We remember he's kind of like a R&B stalwart. Like, he's the guy that's Mr. Dependable. He's always going to put out a project. Might not get the mainstream love it deserves, but you know you'll get a solid project. But this Joe is at the pinnacle of his mainstream height to success. So he'll always have Stutter as the one track that helped elevate him. And he had the remix to the Mariah remix, sampling who? My boy Keith. But this was, to me, Joe's probably height as far as mainstream success. And when people think about, and it drives me crazy when people are like, I haven't heard from Joe since, what's he been doing? I haven't heard from him since Stutter. Like, pay attention. Because this is why people remembered him, because that run was so huge. But fans know Joe ain't never been anywhere. He's still consistently popping up and doing what he does.
I see a comment here saying, I met Joe and he's humble and he's one of my favorite artists. Let me tell you guys, Joe is one of the most humble and down-to-earth artists you'll ever meet.
Truth.
You know, super cool. We love Joe. That's another reason we love Joe.
Yeah.
But Ed, I just got to say, that remix with your boy Mystical, I'll tell you, I never really understand what Mystical is saying on a song. He's just kind of screaming and yelling. But, I mean, I guess it works.
Mystical is not my favorite, but this is why I keep going back to Busta Rhymes and the album he dropped a couple of days ago. What I miss so much is energy. Everybody on the radio, from R&B to hip hop, sounds like they half asleep. They sound like they just somebody rolled them in the studio. They have no life. Say what you want about Mystical. That man is nothing but pure energy. And it gets you hyped, even if he's talking ridiculous. Give me energy in my music, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please. I'm going to name a couple more male albums that came out this year before we move on to the females here. We've got Boyz II Men, Nathan, Michael, Sean, and Wanye. We've got Gerald Levert. We've got Guy. We've got Casey and JoJo. They were doing their crazy thing on that album. And Ed, we got Keith Sweat, Didn't See Me Coming. That's the one with the Little Mo record on it, right?
It is. This album was a little bit more hip-hop than his usual albums, but I liked it.
And then we have Profile, Nothing But Drama. And Next, Welcome to Next-to-See. What albums stand out there, Tom?
I like that Next album. I know it doesn't get as much attention as some of their debut, but it had Wifey on it, and Beauty Queen, I think, was the lead single, which didn't blow up huge, but it was also a solid effort. But there's some album cuts. I mean, Next, like I always talk about, RL is our guy. Sometimes they don't get the attention they deserve, but they put out good music. You know, just because it wasn't a single, they have some good album cuts. So, you know, I don't mind highlighting that one.
And Ed, I need to talk about the Boyz II Men album, because I feel like, and I'm curious what the people say about this album, because this is the album that they did on their own without all the top producers. They wanted to produce and write it all, you know, on their own. And a lot of Boyz II Men fans, like diehard Boyz II Men fans, love this album, but the general public not really. Talk about that, Ed.
I think this is because when we start going into 2000, again, as I've said a million times, I feel like the audience starts to kind of shift a little bit every decade. And Boyz II Men really wasn't the mainstream force it was. Hip hop was starting to move into a different genre, starting to get a little bit more youth centric, and they were kind of still doing their same thing. I'm a fan of the album. It's not my favorite. I can't remember where I ranked it. I know I ranked their album. Someone will come in the comments and say, you ranked it at number 7. I can't remember where I ranked it. But I do like it, and I think it's a little underrated. I think some people do overrate it a little bit, but it's a solid album in their discography for sure. I
just want to shout out I see in the comments people are mentioning Profile. Personally, I never got into the song Liar. I never really liked it. It wasn't for me. But I just want to shout out Joe once again, because he wrote, if you guys didn't know, he wrote on both of Profile's albums. So, I mean, they actually had a star-studded cast, and they had some solid albums, even aside from the singles. So, you know, shout out to Profile.
Yep, shout outs to Profile. Let's get into the ladies here. Some great R&B albums that came out from the ladies. I'm going to start out here talking about Toni Braxton, The Heat. You've got Just Be a Man About It. You've got, of course, the big record, He Wasn't Man Enough. He Wasn't Man Enough. I think I mentioned this like last episode. It sounds exactly like You Rock My World, but I actually probably enjoy He Wasn't Man Enough more than You Rock My World.
Yes, because as I said, I'm not a fan of You Rock My World. So send your hate tweets to E.T. Bowser on that one.
But that album, to me, like I really enjoy that album. It's probably my third favorite Toni album. It goes 1, 2, 3 or 2, 1, 3. I got it. Number 1 and 2 I gotta decide on. But this was actually a solid body of work, and it really transitioned her into the 2000s. Just Be a Man About It. Of course, with Dr. Dre doing the speaking parts, I thought that was really cool. And there's a couple of cool album cuts on there. Fairy Tale, the one that Babyface wrote, I really like that song. Ed, that was a good reintroduction for Toni into the 2000s, right?
It was solid. I will admit that when this first dropped, now that I think about it, this is the first era that we discussed that I'm actually in college the whole time. So yeah, I'm feeling young for once. So I rocked this one in college. And when I first got it, I thought it was just okay. I love the singles, but the album cuts weren't really hitting for me. But over time, because as you pointed out, Kyle, this is a slightly different sound for Toni. Mm-hmm. And I think it worked. It was just one that my ears just had to adjust to a little bit. So yeah, this was one that kind of helped transition her to a new millennium, so to speak. We were saying that to death in 2000, and for those who don't know. But yeah, at the time I was kind of like, I don't know about this one, but it grew on.
Well, let me add one thing, Kyle. We often talk about these artists who, they go trendy after a couple albums to try to, remain relevant. Yeah. But I thought He Wasn't Man Enough was Toni Braxton going gracefully into her evolution, which I think is great. We don't give artists enough credit for that. We don't celebrate that enough. So this album, like you mentioned, she took it to another sound, but it worked. It wasn't like she was trying too hard. So we got to respect that.
Yes. In 2020 terms, it's like I don't mind an R&B artist using a little bit of trap inspired stuff, but if you're R&B artist out here rapping, throw it in the trash. Age gracefully into the new cycle.
Mm-hmm. And then Tom, we got to talk about Maya's album. Case of the X is on this album. Falling is on this album.
Great album. This album.
Is Falling on this? No, Falling's not.
No, Falling's on the
Best of Me is on this album.
Mm-hmm.
Best of Me was on this. Yeah. I mean, this was an album I really liked because I was looking forward to this one. I liked her debut. The Best of Me remix with Jay-Z gets more of the credit. I actually preferred this version with Jadakiss that was on this album.
My boy, I agree.
Yes.
I like the original.
I feel like we're the only two that feel that way, but maybe people in the comments could chime in.
Oh, no, the comments going to slander us.
Case of the X was obviously a huge single for Maya. Well, this, to me, was another album that had some deep album cuts that I really liked. Didn't get the recognition they deserved. And regardless, this album, made Maya, a huge star. She went to do Lady Marmalade a couple years after that. And, the rest is history. But another solid album in Maya's catalog.
It might be my favorite Maya album. I haven't ranked her discography yet. I'll get to it, y'all. I'm only with one man. But this might be my favorite of her albums. And plenty of album cuts. Fear of Flying, Man in My Life, the MJ kind of remake thing. Mm-hmm. Really fun album.
I agree. Let's talk about Erykah Badu here. She dropped her album, Mama's Gun. Ed, big album here.
Big album. I love this album. And for a lot of Badu fans, they think that this is her best work. I kind of still think her debut is best. Her debut is 5 stars to me, by the way. So I don't think this quite measures up to that. I know y'all going to get me in the comments, but I said what I said. This was a really, really, really strong album that, again, helped move her a little bit more into a different direction while keeping her core sound. And it has some of her most memorable songs on it. This was a big one for Badu.
I'll tell you what, guys, and for everyone listening to this podcast, via audio, we do this thing live every Saturday night. So feel free to chime in on YouTube, on Instagram. But man, we got to do an episode where we just acknowledge these comments. I'm reading these comments, guys. I would love to acknowledge all these. We just got to interact with our fans. One episode, guys. Let's just do that. Let's just talk to everyone tuned in all night, and we'll have a good time. But
yeah,
I had to mention that. We're reading them.
Tom, let's talk about Tamia's album here. Follow up to the amazing debut, but the second album, Stranger in My House, that's a great song. Shout out to Shep Crawford. But the second album, a little different than the debut.
a little different. Yeah, she went in kind of a different direction. She evolved her sound a bit. I believe that "Can't Go For That" was the first single, which
Yeah.
I thought was a cool song. You know, had the sample on there. There's some other songs I like on there as well. I didn't like it quite as much as her debut, but I also really like this one as well. So to me, it made another strong impact, and she kind of solidified herself as one of the top voices in R&B, and we still look at her as that.
There's no such thing as a bad Tamia album. So
Yeah.
even though this one to me, I wouldn't call it. It's probably not in my top 3 or 4 Tamia albums. Probably more in the middle, maybe even closer to the end. But that's not a slight on it. It's still a great album. Of course, "Stranger in My House" is the crown jewel that we all remember. But it's a good album, solid from front to back.
I see this comment from Lawrence. "Dear John, yes, amazing song, agreed."
Oh yeah, "Dear John."
Yeah, that was an awesome song. Man, so many albums that we can talk about here. I'm gonna name a couple here, and you guys just let me know what stands out to you guys here. Let me just pull up my phone here to get the entire list here.
Nicolette Carney, that's 4th on your list. Yeah, that's probably not going to make my top 5. But "Tell Me Who" is a favorite on the album. I thought "Tell Me Who" was cool.
Yeah.
Not one of my favorites, but it's a good song.
Okay, I'm gonna name a couple more albums here from the ladies. You guys let me know. Shantae Moore dropped an album. Kelly Price dropped an album. Sade. I mean, we got to mention Sade here. Ed, maybe you can touch on Sade right now.
Which Sade album was that?
Lovers Rock.
Suddenly went blank. Okay, yeah. Again, this is an album that Sade fans love. To me, it's not my favorite. Again, Sade is kind of like, to me, not really a bad album per se, but it wasn't as just memorable as some of her bigger hits from a few years before. So solid, but not my favorite.
Kyle, I gotta be honest. I'm just waiting for this rookie conversation. So
we'll get to it. We'll get to the rookie conversation.
You know why, Ed?
I know why. I've been ready for this.
Can we get into the rookie conversation now?
Well, let me talk about my girl Kelly Price first.
All right.
I gotta shout out my girl, if he's gonna shout out his person in a minute. So you know how much I love Kelly and how much I love the debut album, my favorite R&B album of all time. So expectations were pretty high for this one. And because my expectations were so high, when I heard it, I was like, yeah, that's all right. But this ain't the 5-star incredible joint I was expecting. But over time, it was an album that I grew to really love. And she's got some really fun album cuts. Like "Married Man" should have been a single. I will say that to my grave.
Hold on, Kyle. I see this comment from our boy Shaquille Perry. We got to discuss Carl Thomas.
Yeah, we will.
Oh, we gonna get to Carl.
Oh, that was his rookie album. Shaquille, that was his rookie album.
Relax.
Guys, we're getting there. We're getting there. Relax, Shaquille.
Okay, we'll get to the rookie albums now. So I apologize if we skipped anyone else here. We also got some hate on Twitter for mentioning R. Kelly, but
oh boy,
your disclaimer didn't work. But
this whole thing could be over for that, Like we could end up being over.
Yeah, it happens. So I appreciate you guys even more for tuning in with us. But I'm going to name a couple of rookies here, since we're going to talk about the rookies. Amel Larue, Tamar Braxton. People don't know that was her debut album. Her debut was Not Love and War.
It was.
3LW, Musiq Soulchild, Candy, Jill Scott, Carl Thomas, Avant, Lucy Pearl, Pink. That's
I love how Kyle's reading off his notes. You should have committed this to memory, Kyle. This is R&B here.
That's true.
This is the man who came on the podcast with a bucket on his head, and he's kind of talk about people from. Oh,
listen, guys.
Here it is again.
Listen, this is R&B we're talking here. You got to memorize it.
This is true.
Why am I here? I should be out fighting crime, not fighting Tom.
Oh, and Noel Gourdin, After My Time. Someone wanted me to mention that one. I mean, just so many albums that we can
Where do we even start?
Like, listen to those debuts. Carl Thomas, Jill Scott, Musiq Soulchild. That alone would be an incredible debut class. This 2000's off the chain.
I saw R&B Pink in the comments. Angel in Disguise, shout out.
Yep. Let's start off by talking about, let's talk about the two people from Philly here. Musiq Soulchild and Jill Scott. Tom, Musiq Soulchild. This is your favorite artist, a friend of yours as well. But talk about this album.
It was just all right. I mean, it was okay for a debut.
Oh,
No,
God.
Really?
No, pay him no mind.
Classic album. I'm trying to think where it ranked. I was just trying to think in the decade where it ranks. But I mean, classic album. You know, you just take it back to that moment when this album came out, because I feel like he evolved or helped evolve that neo soul sound and made it more relatable, made it more of like that guy next door. You could relate to the tracks. You know, he was singing, he had like misspelled words in the track listing. It was just kind of a different thing. Like, you know, a lot of artists at that time, don't forget, they seemed like they were on a pedestal and, you know, they were on another level. But Musiq just seemed like some guy you knew like already. And that's what I respected about him. I can relate to the songs. I just want to sing. Love that album. I mean, Ed, you can't fight me. That's a classic. That's a classic.
Well, I can't fight you on this, and I will let me rewind time a little bit to get perspective for 2000 for those in the chat, like my boy Damon, my boy Derek, for those who might be a little bit too young to remember this. But I remember clearly in 2000 when we had Musiq and we had Jill. These were artists. Now, we had Badu and we had D'Angelo doing kind of the neo soul thing, but this was the era where neo soul really took roots and really took off. And I think those were the two albums, along with Badu's album, and then we had India later on, that really pushed neo soul as a genre for the reasons that Tom just said. You had artists coming out, like, just be real. Like, when you hear an Usher, like, that's kind of hard to relate to because it's this gigantic R&B superstar. But when you see Musiq, it's just like a dude next door singing about the girl next door. Yeah. And you got Jill walking in the park talking about fighting people with Vaseline. These are more relatable lyrics from artists who don't look like shirtless supermodels. Like regular people singing about regular things and doing it from a very earthy, soulful, sympathetic, relatable tone. And I don't think we give neo soul enough credit for setting the tone. And that's really why it really took roots, especially like among my friends. I remember in college, I remember a friend of mine, shout out Janae, she came in, heard the song, what was his, the first song, I'm blanking on it, the debut single, Tom, from Musiq.
Just Friends.
Just Friends, yes. I kept wanting to say Buddy, and I'm like, that was like years later. But yes, when Just Friends came out, she was just going crazy, and I listened to it, and I was like, I've never heard a song like this, because it felt like he was talking. It didn't even feel like he was singing. And I'm not saying that with these dudes who can't sing and just rapping. I mean, the lyrics were so conversational that they took root. And that, to me, is really the power of neo soul. Songs and lyrics that take root and are so relatable.
Yeah. Kyle, I want to address a couple comments. It was easier for Musiq and Jill because D'Angelo set the tone by going against the grain. No one's debating that. We totally agree with that. He opened that lane. They kind of evolved the sound. I want to acknowledge another comment from our boy Theo Sullivan, Brandon. And now Musiq killed his feature with Ty Dolla $ign. Man, Musiq has come up in the world, guys. Collaborating with Ty Dolla $ign. Wow.
Who doesn't collaborate with Ty Dolla $ign?
Player, you do not want me to talk about that album because Twitter's still mad at my comments on that thing.
I mean, let's talk about Jill Scott's debut. This is one that everyone loves as well. And it's interesting. We've had this conversation too. Neo soul, that sound, if you're a little younger like I am, like, and you listen to it today, you might not understand that sound.
Yeah.
But when Jill came out with that, it was so groundbreaking to a lot of people. And it was just this cool chick from Philly, had great songs. On this one? I mean, Tom, go ahead. Yeah.
First off, shout out to Dre and Vidal. Shout out to Carvin and Ivan, you know, for their work on this album, you know, on all these albums from A Touch of Jazz, you know, which Jazzy Jeff from, you know, who worked with Fresh Prince, Will Smith, kind of created for these artists. Shout out to our boy Keith Pelzer as well. But man, Ed, I remember when Jill Scott came out with Getting in the Way. Now, to me, that video, right, it was groundbreaking because a lot of times we saw artists trying to look so smooth, so cool, so styled. Man, Jill came out. She was ready to fight. She wasn't all dolled up and dressed up. She was just singing, and she was, you know, keeping it real. I love that, Ed.
Exactly. It was just what I was saying earlier. These are artists that were extremely relatable. And we
Yeah.
kind of live in this era now where it's like, we relate with people who put crazy stuff on Instagram and blah, 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 blah. But in 2000, we had never really seen artists just standing on the porch or just walking down the park and just saying, okay, I'm going to go to this girl's house and fight her over my man. It sounds a little commonplace today, but in 2000, I promise y'all, these were artists who were relating to us on a totally different level. But the level of actual soul and meaning and passion in their vocals is what really hooked us. So Jill did it like no one other.
I will say Jill and Musiq are two of the artists. It might be premature, but who I consider legendary, who've come out in the 2000s. Alicia's another. But I saw this comment I wanted to acknowledge. Would you say this is the year that influenced Michael Jackson to have Butterflies song the next year? Now, let's not forget, Butterflies was written by Marsha Ambrosius, who came out of the camp of A Touch of Jazz with Jill, with Musiq. So, I mean, that sound was getting big. So it wasn't a surprise that they would try to push it on other artists. And Michael, came to it and liked it. And Butterflies is an awesome song.
Yep. You beat me to it. I was going to say, you think that Michael was influenced by it. He was literally, because it was the same team that was in his pocket making that happen. Again, incredible moment for R&B. It's one of the reasons why I miss this era so much. You can really see things changing before your eyes.
And I love this Jill Scott album. I would call this one a classic too.
I think so, yeah. No question. Let's talk about some other male albums here. Not that Jill is a male, but you guys ruined my flow here. But Carl Thomas and Avant, two fantastic debut albums here. Carl Thomas obviously had been with Bad Boy for a couple years now, doing cameos, doing hooks, but he finally got his chance to shine, and what a debut.
Ed,
debut.
We are getting into albums, Ed, where we could probably spend a whole episode talking about. Am I wrong?
You are not wrong. And I brought this up on an earlier episode. This album means so much to me because my college professor, who I hadn't even really talked about music with, who was actually a really good singer and writer, he talked about how great this album was from a writer's perspective. He was like, people in R&B, artists aren't writing like Carl is writing. And it made me listen deeper into the lyrics. And I'm like, man, this dude, Carl, is writing. He's like poetically writing these songs in a way that writing had you think writing is bad now? Well, this is before everything sounded like an Instagram hashtag. But it had started to slide a little bit. It wasn't ridiculous yet. But Carl really stepped it up here. And this is an album that you have to look very hard to find flaws in. A incredible piece of work, and it's a debut, hard to beat.
Yeah,
I love it.
Classic right there. And then Avant's debut, Tom, some great records on there.
I was ready to hear this one when I first heard his first single, Separated. And man, this one is one of my favorites of all time as well. My First Love, the cover song he did with Kiki Wyatt's on there. There's some great album cuts on here as well. I could go through them all, but for me, front to back, I love this album. And Avant didn't disappoint. He's become one of the premier acts in R&B since then. He's kept it going, which has been great to see. His debut, My Thoughts, has become a personal favorite, though, definitely.
And on Soul and Stereo, just this week, I went through Avant's entire discography and ranked them from bottom to top, all 9 or 10 albums, however many it is. And sitting at the top of that list is this album right here. And I don't think many people would disagree, but really it's between that and the Director album. But I think this one, when you look at the singles, when you look at consistency across the board, it's really good. And I don't think we give Avant enough credit for being one of those artists in 2000 who is kind of like a lesser version of Joe almost, where he comes in, he almost consistently puts out good music. And while a lot of his singles don't necessarily chop the charts, you can almost always guarantee you can get a solid project. Of all those albums, there was only maybe one that I thought was but across the board, he's pretty solid. And it all started with this one. So got to give Avant a little bit more love than we have.
And shout out to producer Steve Stone Huff, who produced the whole album with Avant.
Yep.
His work on that was amazing.
Yep. And shout out to the song Getaway. That's one of my favorites from Avant.
Too sad.
That's a pretty sad song.
I mean, Separated is sad enough. He starts off the song, it's like, every time I see you, I get a bad vibe. Ugh, he was ready.
I'm going to go with a couple more debuts here. Obviously, we have Tamar, we have Amel Larue, we have Candy. But Tom, I'm really curious because we've been fighting about this off the air.
Uh-oh.
3LW's debut and Pink's debut. Are
Wait,
these
what?
Pink's album and 3LW?
Okay.
Are these pop albums or are these R&B albums? Because we just mentioned Carl Thomas, we just mentioned Avant, Musiq Soulchild, Jill Scott. That sounds a little different than
Yes.
Broken Promises and Pink's album.
And that's my point. But see, the thing is, you guys convinced me that R&B in 2000 was evolving. So those artists you named were kind of influenced by our previous generation. And 3LW and Pink, most people don't realize Pink on her debut was a lot of R&B. That was an evolution of where R&B was going. So like Carl Thomas and Avant was kind of a reflection of where R&B had come from. But if you look at R&B after this year, a lot of artists followed the sound that 3LW and Pink had come with this year. So I guess that was a different lane of R&B. That's all. I'll have to put it that way.
No, that's exactly what it is. And it's, I mean, I won't get on my soapbox. You can go to Soul and Stereo. I've written about this a million times. But I do think one mistake that we make as R&B fans or music fans in general is that we have a tendency to box artists into what a sound that we assume something is. So if R&B to you is Mary J. Blige, anything that doesn't sound like Mary J. Blige is an R&B. But R&B is wide ranging. We talked about D'Angelo's funk album. Like, that doesn't sound like anything else we mentioned, but we wouldn't say that's not R&B. You got the Pink album, which is way more R&B than her later efforts when she went the rock and pop route. We've got 3LW, which certainly is a little bit more poppy, kind of like the Destiny's Child album that comes out the next year, where it kind of leans pop, but that's the sound of the time. So there are different facets of R&B, but I still think there's enough roots in them that still makes them authentically R&B.
I agree. And Ed, can we confirm that Players Gonna Hate is like, or Players Gonna Play is like your theme song?
Well, yes, if you didn't already know.
By 3LW?
I will freely admit I was a college student, grown man, probably 20 years old, driving around to Promises. Yes, I was rocking that joint in 2000.
Interesting.
Interesting.
I'm trying to imagine it. I can't. But Tom, can we talk about Lucy Pearl's album? You just interviewed Dawn from In Vogue. She was a part of this. Raphael Sadiq's a part of it as well. This is one of those like hidden gems that if you know about it, you know about it, and you just know how good it is.
Well, what I remember about this album at the time, and Ed, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it was just, so exciting that this collaboration happened and these artists came together. Ali Shaheed Muhammad, Raphael Sadiq, and Dawn Robinson of In Vogue and formed a supergroup. I mean, there have been supergroups before. I didn't really feel like many of this flavor. And man, they gave us an album that it was appreciated at the time, and a couple of the singles were big, but looking back, I don't really feel like it gets talked about a lot because I think there was supposed to be another album and never happened. But, we still have to appreciate what they gave us. And I thought it was a special moment for R&B.
I remember rumors of this album, and I was like, that'll never happen because those artists were just so, in my mind, separate, and they were so huge on their own. It would be hard. I mean, it'd be like saying today, oh, Chris Brown and Tamia, and I'll throw Ty Dolla $ign because he got to be in everything. They're going to make an album. And you were like, okay, yeah, we'll see. But these artists came together. The album happened, and it was a good moment. Now, what happened, you can go, that's been chalked up to internet and lore and rumor. I won't get into that. But I think that their legacy has been a little bit suppressed because we didn't really get in the follow-up. So they hit big, and then they kind of separated as quick as they got together. But they deserve a little bit more attention and appreciation.
I think so. Great album. How much time do we have left, guys?
We got about 15 minutes.
All right, well, we got to get started on these awards here. We do it every week here. Who was the Rookie of the Year in 2000? Who has the best rookie album, the best debut album, or just who made the biggest impact? I know that's like 4 different questions here, but
we know who Tom's picking.
I'm first, right?
Yeah, Tom, you go first.
Listen, guys.
Man, he's been waiting for a whole decade to do this.
Oh my god!
He put the bucket back on too.
Listen,
Now he
guys,
pulls it all the way down.
it's actually a 3-way tie for me between Jill Scott, Musiq, Soulchild, and Avant for Rookie of the Year.
Really?
Believe it or not, I got to give credit where it's due. I love the Musiq album. I love the Jill album. I love Avant. So that's where I'm going, guys. Musiq, we still love you. Don't worry.
Man. Ed?
See, I always look at these from the perspective of 2000. I think it's kind of cheating to use like a 2020 filter on this. So if I was 2000, I would have bet my money on Carl Thomas because this album was, as we have documented, incredible. And I thought that he was the one that was really going to set the tone for the decade coming. Now, if we had known, I probably would have said Musiq or Jill. Two, I love both of them. But I probably would have put my money in 2000 on Carl Thomas.
Can I just shout one more thing about that Carl Thomas album? You know, a lot of people maybe not remember that was on Bad Boy.
Yep.
But Diddy didn't force him to go into a more commercial sound. That was a totally Carl Thomas album. It wasn't totally commercial, even the singles. I mean, I Wish, dynamic song. Shout out to Mike City.
Yeah.
But man, I love the album.
Yeah, to me, I Wish is like one of the greatest written R&B songs of all time.
Well,
I know someone's going to mention some Stevie Wonder song or some Donny Hathaway song.
Wait, what?
I Wish?
The greatest written... Wow.
One of, like, just lyrically and conceptually, that's... What other song talks about that topic?
I mean, I've never even thought about that topic until I heard that song, so, I mean...
There you go.
I mean, for the era, like I was saying, my professor was saying, I agree with Kyle. I don't know about the greatest of all time. Before its era, no question. And not just that song, like almost every song on that album was just so well written, intricately written. When I do my reviews and I talk about well-written songs, I'm talking about this. I'm not talking about songs that you can just take 3 words and put on your Instagram profile. That's not a well-written song. That is a tweet.
Listen.
Shout out to Shaquille Perry. He's going nuts right now that we're talking about this album. Summer Rain, man. Now that's
that's a great one. Listen, the 3 greatest written R&B songs of all time. Number 3, I'll say number 3 is "Ribbon in the Sky" by Stevie Wonder.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 is "Lady in My Life" by Michael Jackson.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And number 1 is "I Wish" by Carl Thomas.
Where are we at?
I was waiting for him to throw a shot in there, so I'm actually proud of him.
I don't even know how you answer this question. What are the best written songs of all time?
There's no way I could do that
right
off the
now.
top of my head. No way. I refuse.
Can We Talk by Tevin Campbell is number 4.
Wow.
I definitely can say that's wrong.
That's wrong?
Yes,
Kyle.
I can definitely tell you that's wrong.
Why is that wrong?
Kyle, just give us your answer.
Carl Thomas is the Rookie of the Year.
Wow.
I really love that album. Really love that album. Music's a close second though. But
Damn.
Oh yeah, no question.
But no, I gotta go with Carl Thomas on this one. Second question here. What is an album that you were really anticipating in the year 2000 when it came out? Or waiting for it to come out? Tom?
I'm going to come right back to this one. That D'Angelo album, I still can't figure it out, guys. I'm going to go home after this podcast and listen to it again. I'm going to get to the bottom.
I feel like if you listen to it 20 times, it's not going to change. Probably.
I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to come back on this podcast in a couple weeks and be like, I figured it out, guys. It's a class.
This isn't a math question, it's music. You can't.
There must be something I'm missing.
You can't crack the code.
Maybe I need better headphones. I don't know.
My wife loves it. I think it's meh. Like it's just what it is.
I mean, is it different if we look at the album cover while listening? Is that like the female version of it? Well, I'm not trying to look at the album cover while listening.
I can't help you there. What you do in your free time, you can just keep it yourself.
Tom, just sit in a dark room and just light candles on. Maybe it'll sound better.
Oh,
it's sometimes you got to appreciate the vibe. Maybe that's
Oh my God! Listen, you go listen to Ty Dolla and get off of here.
All right, Ed, what was your most anticipated in 2000?
Well, if I already answered this one, but I can keep it going. My girl Kelly, because I just was so excited after her debut, which blew me away to listen to this. And like I said, at the time, I was mildly disappointed. But it's not a bad album at all. It's definitely not. And it's grown over me a lot over the years. But when you have like an album that's your favorite of all time, you expect it to be your second favorite of all time. That didn't quite happen. but I still love this album a lot.
My most anticipated here was Jagged Edge, because I remember just how just each song was on the radio, every single that they put out, and it all sounded so great to me. And when we look back at that album, like you guys said, definitely their best, but really a launching pad for everyone involved, whether it was B. Cox, who goes on to become one of the premier producers of the decade. You've got Jagged Edge, Brandon and Brian. I think they really showcased their pen throughout that whole album. And that album, they really developed their sound. So that was the album I was looking forward to, and man, I'm glad I'm waited. And I see a lot of people in the comments right now saying, why aren't you talking about Sisqó's album? Ed, do you want to clear it up for the people? Because I think we've talked about this already.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's not much to clear up. Go to Wikipedia and see when the album came out. It was 99. However, we understand that the biggest impact of this album was the year 2000. So usually I mention it with Alicia and Mariah when the album came out in 2003, but we felt the impact in 2004. We'll talk about Sisqó next time, but yes, it is one of my favorites. It just kind of drifted into 2000, but it's technically 99.
Thank you. What's an album, guys, that you feel like is underrated, needs to be looked at again for those that haven't checked it out in a while, or needs to be celebrated more? Tom?
I got 4. I'll go through them quick. Because this was a time when soundtracks were still pretty dope. We got to give a shout to the Romeo Must Die soundtrack, which was Aaliyah's. She had 4 really good songs in there. Try Again was on there. Come Back in One Piece. I Don't Wanna was on there. But this album also had Playa on there, Destiny's Child, Genuine. We had a remix of a Joe song, Rose in the Concrete World, where I never even knew there was an original. I'm not sure if there's an original of that song, but
I do like that version, yes.
I got to shout that one out. Now, we had the Nutty Professor 2 soundtrack, which was where we first heard Musiq Soulchild's Just Friends on there. You also had Case on there, Missing You. You had Janet Jackson, Doesn't Really Matter, which was a great song. You had Brian McKnight on there, Thinking About Me, which I really liked, and a whole bunch of other pretty good songs. Want to mention that one.
Don't forget, Tom, we also had Solo Jazz on that one.
There we go. That's where we first heard Solo Jazz of Drew Hill. We had the Save the Last Dance soundtrack. You guys remember that one? We had Casey and JoJo with Crazy on that one.
Going crazy.
Had a song I really like on there by Kevon Edmonds, Move It Slow, which is one of my favorites. But that's another soundtrack I wanted to mention. And now, Ed, this one's for you. Guru's Jazzmatazz Volume 3 Street Soul.
Oh, my goodness.
I love this album. I love this album. Now, Guru from, rest in peace, from Gangstar, he was doing this Street Soul, this Jazzmatazz series. Man, Volume 3, he had Amel LaRue, he had Donnell Jones, Angie Stone, he had Bilal, Erykah Badu, Craig David even. I mean, this was a project, guys, and I couldn't let this podcast go without mentioning that one. So,
wow.
Every once in a while, Tom redeems himself. He has an orange bucket on his head. He's sipping gin over in the corner, but then he throws on the Jazzmatazz. It's all good. Tom, you're my boy, at least for 5 more minutes.
Wow. Is it my turn?
Ed.
Oh, it's Ed's turn. Sorry, Ed.
Oh, well, I just got blown away because that was just such a great pick. Underrated, I would have to say, just off the top, and it may be recency bias because I just listened to this old discography. I don't think we talk about that Avant album. It's very, very good. And for its era, I think that it's just one that kind of gets buried because there were so many other, you heard the huge names that we mentioned. And we talk about Separated and My First Love. But as an album, I think that one stands the test of time. You drop that in 2020, be album of the year for R&B. So shout out to Avant. I think that one needs a little bit more love.
Nice. My slept on album here, one that people should go back and check out, is Tamar Braxton's debut, Get None, If You Don't Want to Leave Me. There's actually quite a few gems on that album. Tim and Bob's on that album. B. Cox and Jermaine Dupri's on that album. Tricky Stewart. There's a lot of records that I think kind of fell to the wayside because I don't think that was Tamar's time to shine yet. Daryl Delight is on that album as well. But if you go back, check out that album, and understand that Love and War was not Tamar's debut. She had a debut that came out in 2000, and that was actually pretty good. So, I mean, that's my slept on.
Kyle, we got 5 minutes literally, just so you know.
All right. Well,
cut off.
All right. Well, let's do this now. Top 3 favorite albums in 2000. Tom, number 3.
I'll go real quick. My number 4 and my number 5 are, I hate to say it, but Jill Scott and Joe. Unfortunately, wow. I'm sorry. I love those 2 classics to me, but my number 3, I'm gonna have to go with Avant's debut. My Thoughts. Love that one. We've highlighted a lot in this episode. Great album.
Ed?
So many bangers. I'm gonna have to run through some honorable mentions real quick, and probably gonna give away my top ones, but who cares? Shout out to Dave. Shout out to Jill. Shout out to Jay. Shout out to Musiq. But my number 3 is my man Carl Thomas.
My number 3 would be Musiq Soulchild.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's in my top 3.
I didn't know you ever listened to that album.
It's a solid album.
Kyle.
It's a solid album.
I'm surprised.
It's a solid album.
No Ja Rule features, and you listen to
it. That's true. Man, in the year 2000, Ja Rule was killing it.
He was doing something.
He was dominating. Tom, number 2.
So J.E. Heartbreak is number 2 from me. Like I said, front to back, love it, classic, still play it today. Album cuts are bangers. That's my number 2.
Ed?
Number 2, my girl Badu.
Any reason why it's not number 1?
Oh, I was just trying to be quick, but I can go on.
Why is it not number 1?
Well, it's not number 1 because there's one I like better, but there is. I love this one. I don't think it's her best work, but it's super close and one of the defining albums for the era for me. One of my favorite all-time neo soul joints.
My number 2 will have to be Carl Thomas, actually. I find myself listening to that a lot more as I get older, and it's just a great album. So I'm going to go Carl Thomas for my number 2. And Tom, you're number 1, and don't mention the guy that we're not allowed to talk about. I think we're getting killed on Instagram right now, but...
Ed, before we get cut off, I just want to give you a quick shout out, Ed, for rocking your Quavo outfit to the podcast, man. That's much respect.
Quavo? Actually, I don't even know what Quavo looks like. Quavo can look like you, all I know. I just know I hate his voice.
You guys know my number 1, Musiq Soulchild. I Just Want to Sing. One of my favorites of all time. It was a tough one this year, guys. I love a lot of these albums. It could have gone either direction, but one of my favorites right there of all time.
Ed?
My number 1 cannot be named. There you go.
Oh no. All right.
That's bad.
I'll leave it at that.
That's bad.
We're gonna get banned.
Listen.
Ed, there's someone literally like yelling at us on Instagram right now or on Twitter.
Well, they can yell. Tell them to DM E.T. Bowser, not Tom or Kyle.
It's too late. My favorite album of the year 2000 is Sisqó's debut, but since we can't name that one, see Cordero, I tried. But my favorite is Jagged Edge, J.E. Heartbreak, phenomenal album. So we're going to go with that. And I think that wraps up the year 2000. Can
I give one more shout out to the everyone who's tuned in on Instagram? Because I'm trying to read these comments and chime in when I can, but we really appreciate you guys coming back every week and chiming in. We read the comments. And I see some of the same names coming back every week, so we really appreciate that.
Exactly.
Seriously, y'all are really intelligent. These are some great, great comments. And I need y'all to have my back when they come to cancel me in 2 seconds.
And I gotta
be real. I gotta be honest. That was my number 1. He shall not be named.
Well, we're here now. I'm looking at the YouTube comments. I want to give them a shout out as well. This is a new platform for us on YouTube, and we have a lot of people watching right now. They're all tuned in, so I appreciate you guys. Before we get out of here, Ed, what's going on with Soul and Stereo?
1 minute warning, guys. 1 minute.
1 minute warning. Check out my review of Avant on Soul and Stereo. Not Avant, but my ranking of Avant's albums and my review of Busta Rhymes' album. One of the best of the year. soulandstereo.com. Go get your life.
Tom, you know I got soul.
We got the interview coming out with Dawn Robinson we just did. We'll be interviewing In Vogue. I'm sorry, not In Vogue, Allure next week. And then we've got the Mark Batson interview coming out and a whole bunch of other stuff. A lot of new music came out this past week, so check it out.
Yep, and I think that's it for this week. I don't know how much time I have left, but I appreciate everyone for tuning in. And we'll be back next week to recap the entire decade. I mean, we've gone year for year, but we're going to do the whole decade next week. Might even have a special guest, so you guys stay tuned for that. Happy Halloween, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
All right.
Tom, the pumpkin is
Peace.
ridiculous.